This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Ryan Tripp with you here as Tripp. We are now hours away from quarterfinal action on our schedules here. Penn State-Boise State going on New Year's Eve. Then obviously New Year's Day, the rematch. Oregon take on Ohio State. Two other games we'll get to here as well in the college football playoff quarterfinals. But looking at you, if you're watching us right now on our YouTube page, I can see you made it out to sunny Phoenix. No problem at all. Sunglasses on. Sunglasses on. Why the hell not? You're just, you know what? I will say, if you're trying to make me feel bad about being in the cold Northeast here, it is like 60 degrees today. So suck it. All right.
No, I got here yesterday. So the team arrived late on Saturday evening. They hit a little bit of a travel snag. I think it was reported that they had like a couple hour delay down in Harrisburg. And then I was with the rest of our radio team, some of the administration and band and spirit. Yesterday, we flew out of Harrisburg. I got in around 2:00 yesterday afternoon. 75, sunny. Like, it is living up to everything you want. This time of year, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Glendale, the whole area, you'll have really, really nice days, but there is the chance, like I was here last year after the Peach Bowl for a short trip, and I hiked Camelback Mountain, but the day we did that, there's some clouds, mid-60s, so it's not always guaranteed that it's what we have today, but it looks like for the duration of our stay here is going to be 75 and sunny during the day. It does, if it's any consolation, it does dip down into the 40s at night, so you do need a jacket, but us tough Northeastern people, we're ready for like that. Here they have the hats, gloves, scarves. I'm like, this is just a little chill near. This is nothing. But really fun trip. Really excited to be out here for the Fiesta Bowl and to be in State Farm Stadium tomorrow on the sidelines for Penn State. Like, I can't wait. I think it's going to be a really good game. I know we're going to break down Penn State-Boise State and obviously Oregon-Ohio State, the Big Ten games, a part of this quarterfinal round. And I think it's actually a shame that one of the Big Ten teams is guaranteed to get knocked out, because I do feel like these are three of the top 4 or 5 teams in the country. But I think to be here, you can get a sense, and James Franklin had the quote the other day, that this isn't a bowl game. This is a playoff game. And to see, having been on bowl trips before, to see how the team is preparing, how they've handled their business, the approach. Like, typically a team flies in a week ahead of time and there's all these little activities. Like, we were at the Rose Bowl 2 years ago. You're going to Disneyland. Then there's a steak dinner. Then there's this competition. Oh, the team has to go to the wax museum. Like, all cool and great experiences. But this is no longer an experience. It is a football game with significant stakes. And to see that contrast from past trips that we've been on in the postseason really does jump out, because the teams here, practice. They didn't practice on Saturday. They got in late, weren't planning to practice Saturday, practiced before they left, and then practiced yesterday. They'll practice today, and the game's tomorrow, and then stay overnight. And then hopefully you go back and get ready to prepare for your next game for any of these teams that are competing in the quarterfinal.
Like you said, it's a business trip here for Penn State, for all these teams right now, right? As you are getting set here to try to advance to the semifinals, Final Four. I guess we're calling the semis. I like the Final Four, but I guess we can't say it for basketball. But like you said, business trip. So the task at hand, Trip, if you're Penn State, it's maybe not an obvious one here. So I'm going to kind of give you a little inside the weeds here, breakdown for Penn State.
Can I ask you to do one thing really quick? Can you give a bit of a monologue? I don't know if you can hear it. I think my toilet is running here in the hotel. Can you hear it on the podcast?
I don't. Oh, my God. Are we having some
flushable monologue?
Oh, my God.
1 second.
This is why I listen to the Still Enrolled podcast, first of all, here, because we are authentic. Sure, we record this so it's not exactly live. And I guess if we wanted to, we could cut this out to make it seem like, we're professionals and that we don't have any issues. But Tripp is back. So I'm assuming, I was just saying, Tripp, that we could have easily edited this out. We're authentic here. We want to give you the real deal behind the scenes. Is your hotel flooding? Do we have an issue?
No. The handle was stuck down. So the water just kept recycling in the toilet. And I could hear it. It's actually driving me nuts. So, yeah. I mean, if it was doing that at night, I would let it go. Because I don't know if you're like me. Do you need a fan or a TV? Are you a white noise sleeper?
No, not at all. Now, if I'm tired, I can go out like really at any point. TV on, TV off does not matter. Silence, light, dark. If I'm tired, I'm out. So you need the noise, huh?
That's what happens when you work nights. Like I need some sort of noise. Even in a hotel, like, can I get that fan running on that AC unit? Do I need to put, like, they make apps that you can put different sounds on, even on Spotify they have it. But yeah, I need some sort of noise wherever I am. I'm very uncomfortable without noise to sleep.
And in this case, when all else fails, just leave the toilet handle down and have one help get you right.
It's stopped, by the way. We can continue.
Oh, so thankfully no flooding going on. That would have been a hell of a podcast issue. Tripp's like with one hand with the gloves on, trying to clean up the other hand, break it down. Boise State, Penn State. So staying Tripp before the toilet rudely interrupted us. That no one's really.
I have a high fiber diet. We're okay.
Oh, thanks for letting the audience know. We were really worried if you were grass fed or not. I guess grass fed beef over there, Brian Tripp. Oh, I'm dying. Oh my god!
So I'll tee this one up.
Holy cow!
We have here are the playoff games. It starts on New Year's Eve with the game we have here in Arizona. Boise State, the number 3 seed, coming off a bye, right? Something we spent time talking about on the podcast last week against a Penn State team that made it out of their first round with relative ease. Were able to get some of the reserves in fourth quarter, and also made it out of it without any significant bumps and bruises. So I think even before you start to break down X's and O's and how do you stop Ashton Jeanty and what can Penn State do in this game, what are the keys to victory? You have, and we'll talk the same thing, Ohio State, Oregon, right? Oregon played in a Big Ten championship. So it's not like they haven't played, but there's a significant difference between having played in a Big Ten championship and then just last weekend, essentially, in a college football playoff game. But same thing here. So how much is rust a factor? How much is staying in that rhythm and consistency a factor? And that's been something that a lot of the teams and coaches have been discussing is it better? Boise State's players say it's not a big deal. We've been sharp at practice. But there's a big difference between going against their development squad and one of the best defenses in the country. So how can you simulate that to stay sharp? And then in Penn State's case, right, or Ohio State's case, we were just discussing this at breakfast. Penn State is already 12-2. That's a 14-game season. They've tied the program record for wins in a single season, and you still think like there's still games to be played.
3 more to go, possibly. Crazy.
Does that start to add up on your body where you're not accustomed? Like, and that's something we can't measure. And we don't have the data. We don't have the results. We don't have proof of it because we've never seen this type of playoff play out in college football before. Like, ultimately, how do you know? Like, you just don't know at this point. I'll tell you, I think if you make it out of that first round healthy, I think you'd rather play. I'll be honest with you. I think you'd rather play. Obviously, that risks defeat, right? But based on how those games played out for Penn State and Ohio State, I think I'd rather be in their spot right now going into this weekend.
I agree. Like we talked about it, like I said, on last week's pod, the midweek kind of Christmas edition pod, about the rest. It's for Boise State and Oregon. It's going to be 25 days since their last game. I'm with you. It's a risk because you could lose and you can get injured. For Penn State and Ohio State, obviously they both won and came out relatively healthy. So you check both of those boxes. And now you're right, going to round 2, you do feel like there is momentum, especially with the Buckeyes case. We'll get to this game a little bit later on with how they just demolished Tennessee and kind of maybe exercising some of those demons from the Michigan game. There's real confidence. And how Vegas has them as a favorite, despite Oregon being the only undefeated team in the country. So that kind of tells you right there, momentum in playing that first round game. It's a risk, but boy, if you can win and come out healthy, which both teams did, it could be a catalyst here going forward, like you said, for this final stretch. You said Penn State, right, played already 14 games, long season ago, still possibly 3 left here. And that, that
it's great. Can I tell you where it's great?
Sure.
That get paid by the game, like myself, Steve Jones, Jack Ham. It's great for us. It's great for us.
And that's what we care about. We care about you and your happiness. I'm glad that's the case here. But to your point about like the health, right? Well, Penn State's defense especially is going to get the biggest test all season.
Yes.
Because Ashton Jeanty, man, if you're banged up, if you're a little slow, boy, is he going to make you pay big time, Tripp. As you're getting ready for this game here, both being around Penn State's defense, also prepping for Boise State, I'll ask the obvious question here. How the hell do you try to stop Ashton Jeanty?
You have to tackle him when you have a shot at him. That's like, he's going to break tackles. Like his numbers are absolutely ridiculous in his yards after contact. It's like 1,900 yards after contact. 76% of his yards gained this season.
That's insane. Tripp, that's insane. 75% of his yards after contact.
Right? It's like 5.5 yards per carry after contact this season, which is absolutely insane. And you can point to like, okay, like that's a Mountain West defense. I get it. But if you really sit down and watch how he runs, his balance, his physicality, his speed, his burst, like he is tough to bring down in the open field. So like, not only is he going to get his yards, he's going to make some plays. But I think it's, if you have an opportunity to turn him back inside, if you have an opportunity to slow him down, maybe you don't get him to the ground, but you hold on to him long enough where your teammates you can't allow him to rip the 60, 70-yard runs. You have to try to tackle in space. And ultimately, I think if Penn State's defense tackles well in this game, I think they're in great shape. It sounds like so simple, but defensively, the key for them, their left side of the line is good. The left side of the line is good. So it's going to be interesting. Where do you put Abdul Carter? Can you get Boise State out of the 2nd and 3s, out of the 3rd and 1s, where Jeanty really is a major factor, and they won't be afraid to hand it to him 30 times a game? If you can make the quarterback Madsen, put him in passing situations, how will he respond? Because this is a team that hasn't had to come from behind by more than 2 scores all year. Like they haven't trailed in the second half, essentially all season, it feels like. If Penn State starts fast, because they are the team that's in a rhythm that played last week, how does Boise State respond? They're still going to try to run the football because that's their identity. That is who they are. But they're not accustomed to playing from behind. They're not accustomed to facing that adversity. What would they do in that? Because remember that Oregon game, they're right there with them the entire game. Like had the lead, were tied. It wasn't like they're playing catch up. Oregon was the team that had to score at the end. But even in that game, and a lot of people have pointed to it like, oh, they gave Oregon a great game. And I'm not taking away from their performance against the number 1 team in the country. But as we've talked about, right, Oregon was a much different team the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season. Maybe not defensively as much, but especially offensively with their offensive line. And that was a significant factor. And 2 of Boise State's scores in that game came on short fields after fumbles where Oregon was taking the ball down the field and looked like they were going to score. So they capitalized on turnovers in that game, a point to get to later. But again, Jeanty, you just have to try to tackle. And I'll be honest with you, Penn State did not tackle well in the Oregon game. I thought they tackled okay in the SMU game, but didn't really have, like, there was no pressure in that game because they were up so early and so big on defensive scores. They have to be good in rundown defense and tackle in space.
One thing I've been going back and forth on, and I think I've come to this conclusion, Tripp, Penn State's defense, right, is built more on speed than, let's say, power. And I thought initially, I'm like, oh, man, that's a bad matchup with Jeanty, with how tough he is. And like we talked with just his yards after contact, which is just insane. He always makes the first guy miss or runs through the first tackle. Man, if Penn State's smaller guys, he's matching up against them, odds are he's going to win that battle. But I came to the conclusion of, you know what, I think Penn State's fast defense, while maybe being a little bit undersized compared to others, can actually work on their benefit because, like you said, it's not going to, you are rarely going to get him down on the first guy and one guy only. It's going to have to be 2-3 guys every time. And so if you can get speed to rally to the ball, like you said, set an edge, remember the first guy's not tackling him, but just giving him a little pause, and all of a sudden 2 or 3 guys in a wave can come and tackle him. I actually think Penn State's quicker, fast defense and getting bodies on Jeanty faster compared to maybe trying to get him down one-on-one, I think it actually could be to Penn State's advantage here. What do you think about that matchup, Tripp?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things I want to emphasize here. Number 1, Kobe King at middle linebacker and Jalen Reed are key players in this game because Reed will play up. Like you got to assume he's going to play up in the box a little bit more. And he's a physical safety. Like before KJ Winston went down, he was going to be kind of that star, like whatever that lion position, whatever you want to call it on your defense, essentially a 3rd linebacker on the field. And then when KJ Winston went down, he kind of shifted back to his more natural spot at safety, but they felt like he was more He's better when he plays close to the line of scrimmage. So I think you'll see him in that role in this game, along with Kobe King, the middle linebacker. They have to tackle. Like, they're the stars. They got to make the plays. But here's where I think Penn State has a real advantage. You talk about that speed. There's no quicker defensive tackle. Like, they have not faced a Zane Durant this year. They have not faced a Zane. They have not faced an Abdul Carter this year. They probably have not faced, like, Oregon, I guess, but deny Dennis Sutton. And those guys going sideline to sideline, Jeanty's not going to outrun them. He just will not outrun them. And I think the overall talent up front, but then the depth. Guy had a really good game against SMU, Keziah Izzard. And when Alonzo Ford went down at defensive tackle, it's who's going to step up at the defensive tackle position and really add that depth. You cannot get through this game with just Durant and Devon J. Thomas. This is where another depth piece comes into play. And I thought Izzard was really good. Smith Vilbert's been good. Amin Vanover's been good. So then you have who are those second, third team tackles and ends? Because they're going to need them in this game with how physical it will be up front. And I think the depth and overall talent Penn State has on defense to go along with that speed you're talking about can be a real key for them in this football game.
Obviously, Ashton Jeanty is one of the best players in all of college football. So that's why we're spending a large part of our attention in these terms of from Penn State's defensive perspective, talking about stopping him. And if you haven't watched a lot of Boise State this year, maybe that's a few Jeanty highlights. It's also imperative to stop him, Tripp, because really he's the catalyst. He's the offense. When you look at the Broncos this season, there are just 4 games. Think about it. In 2024, where passing is so prevalent, there are just 4 games this year for Boise State in which they had more passing yards than rushing yards. So they are really reliant on their running back. And Maddox Madsen, they don't really ask him to do a lot. To his credit, he's been efficient. Doesn't really turn the ball over. 22 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. So he's not making any key mistakes. But also, Boise State's really not asking him to make a lot of plays down the field. If you're Penn State's defense, again, you can – I would not say stop. It's unrealistic for anybody. Stop Ashton Jeanty. His lowest rushing yard total was 127 yards this season in the game, and that's because they basically pulled him in the second half. You could have kept going if you wanted to. So he's going to get his. But if you can limit him to, I don't know, under 150, under 175, and just try to make Boise State have to make plays in the passing game, Tripp, I think you feel really good about Penn State's ability here to keep Boise State out of the end zone. And win this game on your terms. And last thing I'll say here, at least in terms of Penn State's defense that you mentioned before about third downs. Boise State, what a shock here, right? Because they're able to run the ball so well. One of the best third down conversion offenses in all of college football. They are 10th in the country, converting just under 48%. You get some stop. You make them, instead of second down and 5, second and 7, second and 8. It's going to go a long way to helping you get off the field if you're Penn State's defense, which at times, like in Oregon, we saw them struggle with.
But it is a defense that has so many tackles for loss, sacks. Like, you feel like at some point there will be a negative play. And maybe it even is stopping Jeanty in the backfield, that they'll be able to create those negative plays defensively. I'm glad you brought up Madsen, because this is where, when we talk about Oregon and Ohio State here in a minute, I think you go position by position, matchup versus matchup. Like, what will decide that game? I think there's so many different things you can look at. And you like, for me, it's really hard to handicap. This game's pretty easy to handicap. It's how many yards is Jeanty going to have? How explosive is he going to be? Can you contain him? And like, this is a Boise, unlike SMU last week for Penn State, that was a team that had a propensity to turn the football over. A Penn State defense that's really good at creating turnovers. Can you do it against Boise State? Or is Maddox Madsen going to continue to be incredibly efficient? Like, this is a game that really could come down to, very simply, stopping Jeanty. Penn State's offense can't turn the ball over. You figure like they're going to get points, but because Boise's not going to give stuff away. They're not going to give the game away like SMU did. So it really is stopping Jeanty, turnovers, and then for Penn State, are you able to be balanced on offense to score points? Like that, who wins in the trenches? Probably it. Like, there's not a whole lot you go position by position that to really dive into here. It's a pretty easy matchup to, like, the path for each team to get there is pretty easy to explain.
No, you're right. And just to flip it on the other side here quickly for Penn State's offense, this time of the year, it's also tough sometimes with numbers, right? Because we looked at SMU's rush defense, and they were one of the best in the country. And we saw both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton really have success, especially in the second half, wearing down that SMU offense. And same thing here, Boise State, top 15 in terms of rush defense. So you think, okay, wow, they're going to have a tough time running the ball. Penn State, whether it's against Oregon, SMU, I think there's no doubt about their ability now to run the ball on anyone and everyone. Their run game's really clicking. And you look at Boise State's defense, their big weakness, Trip, is their secondary. They are giving up, in terms of pass plays of 30 or more yards down the field, they are 130th out of 134, one of the worst in terms of keeping the ball in front of them here. I expect, and at least if you're a Penn State fan, hope to see some big plays here by both Amari Evans and Harrison Wallace. We've seen them be capable of doing in the past. This is a matchup where it feels like you got to push the ball down the field. It's going to be given to you. Can you hit those opportunities?
Yeah, and I think they'll be able to run even though Boise State statistically is a good run defense, no one's been able to stop Penn State's run game. Now that Singleton and Allen are both healthy. And with how that offensive line is playing, consistent, physical, like if Penn State can run the ball, this might not be close, honestly. If they can run the ball and not turn it over on offense and then complement it with that downfield passing game, and the two guys you didn't mention are Warren and Singleton. I think it's a huge game for them in the passing game too. But if they can run the ball, it's game, set, match. It's simple as that, because Aller's going to be able to throw. He's going to have some success throwing too. And I think what you saw in the SMU game was the elements. Like we talked about it time and time again. The elements were a factor. Drew Aller indoors in Phoenix. Look out.
Roof's going to be open?
Roof's closed.
Okay.
Roof's closed. Against that secondary, plus if they can be balanced on offense with the run game, the physicality that they get with their offensive line, Warren blocking in the run game, and Khalil Dinkins doesn't get talked about enough. What he does in the run game, 16 tight end. I don't think Boise State can match that. And that's why I say, like, if you play a clean football game, which Penn State has all year, with really like the two turnovers Aller had in the Oregon game decided the game. And I thought he played incredibly well in the game. But if you play a clean game and you can throw and run the ball, Boise State doesn't have the firepower to go toe-to-toe with Penn State. So I think there's a way Boise State can win, even though Penn State's 11-point favorites in this game. There's a way, and they have that underdog mentality, right? Everyone knows about their history in this bowl game in particular. Like this is a program with tradition and history, and they come in expecting to win. It's not like they're coming in expecting to get steamrolled. But I think it's a different, confident Penn State team right now. And there's a path to Boise winning the game, but there's also a path, like there's no path to Boise blowing out Penn State, you think? Like right. You can see this if Penn State's clicking on offense with its pass game and run game and contains Jeanty and maybe gets a turnover or two, which Boise doesn't do. Like you could see a path to this really flipping Penn State's way. Not going to be easy, but you could see how it could go that way.
We talked about what could happen in this game. What do you expect to happen? Like you said, Penn State's 11-point favorites. Do you expect Penn State to win and cover a close game? What are you expecting to play out here Tuesday night in Glendale?
I see a Boise State team that's hungry with a chip on their shoulder. I think they'll play an efficient and effective first half. I think here's the thing. I think the number of possessions in this game could be pretty low because of both teams running the ball and keeping drives and, third and shorts, keeping drives, extending. Like I could see the possessions being low, but ultimately I think Penn State pulls away in the second half.
I agree. I think like 37-23. I think Penn State wins by 2 touchdowns. I think Boise State hangs tough, but like we outlined with Boise State's pass secondary, big weakness, and their inability in offense, if Jeanty's not the guy to really do anything else, I think there are just too many weak points right now for the Broncos, where Penn State is very well balanced, can beat you in a multitude of different ways. I like them as well here. I think they overpower the Broncos. Give me Penn State 37-23. They roll on to the Final Four. Let's go New Year's Day, Tripp. I know, crazy, right?
I can't.
Crazy. Speaking of crazy, how about this Rose Bowl rematch here? Oregon, Ohio State. Obviously, we saw the Ducks win the initial regular season matchup there back in Eugene. But now Ohio State, we talked about in the open here, comes in with momentum after just demolishing Tennessee. Vegas views them as a favorite here. From Ohio State's perspective, Tripp, what do they have to do differently in your mind from the first matchup to this rematch here in order for them to be able to beat the Ducks and move on and join Penn State, we think, in the Final Four?
Get a call or two to go their way? Is that oversimplifying?
No pass interference.
It's weird. Even though Oregon, we've done this podcast for 18 weeks and Oregon's a Big Ten team, it's still, I don't know that's hit me that this is a Big Ten game in the Rose Bowl, because it's one of those classic matchups, like a Rose Bowl matchup, Oregon, Ohio State. But this is a conference game in the Rose Bowl. Honestly, the first game was there. You go back and like pick different plays, drives. Where did a drive stall out? Where did they turn it over? Where did they have to settle for 3 instead of 7? Like Ohio State got a couple stops there in the red zone, right? In that game where Oregon had to kick field goals late. And that's what gave Ohio State a chance at the end of the game to go down the field with the opportunity to win it. I don't look in like what has to change from that game. This is 2 Titans, 2 great teams with great players at every single position. Probably on paper, and we don't play the playoffs on paper, thank God. But this is probably the number 1 and number 2 team in the country. And like, I think it's just which players make more plays in the game. It's not a who did this last time, who does it this time. I truly think these are all exceptional players. Which team's exceptional players are the ones that prevail and make more plays at the end of the game?
I'll give you, I guess, a specific match I'm watching, and that's Ohio State's front 4 take on Oregon's offensive line. Because you look at that first matchup, right? One of the things that Ohio State's done in every game, except the Oregon game, was get after the quarterback, generate pressure. They did not have a sack on Dillon Gabriel in that first matchup. And they only blitzed 25% of the time. I don't think they want to blitz because especially you saw, right? When you leave those corners on an island, Oregon speed just going to beat you. Dillon Gabriel made some big plays, Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson. And if you blitz, if you're Jim Knowles again in this game, I think you can expect a lot of similar gains and similar big plays here that Oregon had in the first matchup. So you have to get, if you're Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, you have to get pressure just by generating the front 4. Because as we saw in the most recent game Oregon played against Penn State, Penn State was closer. And how many times we talk about a half second here, half second there, they just miss getting Gabriel. He gets the ball so fast. When he's back there, unpressured, he'll pick you apart. Doesn't matter what defense you're running, what coverage, he will always find a way to find a receiver open, put the ball in a tight window. If you let him just sit back there like at 7-on-7 and pick you apart, you have no chance. No chance. That's where it starts and ends for me with Ohio State. If they have any chance in this game of winning the rematch, you have to generate pressure because if you don't, I think we'll see a similar Oregon offensive output that we saw in game 1. And I just don't think I know it was, again, a 1-point thing. Ohio State was driving. I just don't think Ohio State's offense, with their offensive line they have going to this game compared to the first game when they were healthier, I don't think the Buckeyes offense is built to keep up in a similar shootout style game that we saw back in October.
I guess my first answer about which team's players are going to make plays, like, both teams are going to do it. Ultimately, where's the game decided? And I love that you talked about Ohio State's defensive line against Oregon's offensive line, because I think Ohio State's D-line, to your point, played its best game of the season against Tennessee, and the pressure that JTT and Sawyer had in that game, how strong they are with Malik Williams in the middle. I thought against the run game at Tennessee and then to put them behind the sticks and what they did when Tennessee had to pass, I thought they played their best game of the season. Ohio State's offensive line against a really good Tennessee defensive line probably also played its best game of the season. Part of it, kudos to Chip Kelly and Ryan Day for their play calling in the game to relieve a little pressure off of them in that game. But as you're going defense, that OSU defensive line against the Oregon offensive line, I'll turn around. Like Ohio State's offensive line against this Oregon defensive line. The last game we saw Oregon play against Penn State, for as good as this line has been all year against a really good Penn State offensive line, Jordan Birch, Ungalele, they weren't really factors in the game. Can they be factors in this game against that makeshift Ohio State offensive line, which early returns with the extra time were great against Tennessee? But can they control the run game, force Ohio State to throw the football, put pressure on Will Howard in the pass game? Birch, Harmon, and then one of the players I really like on their defense is the middle linebacker Betcher, former baseball player, two-way player, outstanding story. But that front for them against OSU's offensive line, to me, I think it's the trenches, right? The part you talked about, the part I talk about, because guys are going to make plays on the outside,
right?
Like they just are. So which team's better in the trenches probably is the one that wins the game. And it's a really interesting, unique matchup on both sides for the reason we just talked about.
Absolutely. And I think also what's tough here for Ohio State, I thought if you look back at that first matchup, I picked Ohio State to win because I thought Ohio State at that point in the season was playing better football than Oregon was. Obviously, that was not proven to be true. But I feel like opposite now, even though Ohio State's coming in with all this momentum after their Tennessee win, I still feel like Oregon is playing better football, in part because you look at Oregon's run offense now, Tripp, and where they are now compared to where they were when these two teams first met in early October. I mean, Oregon in that game against Ohio State was able to run for 155 yards, about 5 yards a carry. Since then, in 7 games to end the season, Oregon's averaging 180 yards on the ground. So we could talk about Gabriel, all the speed right on offense. We saw it in the Big Ten title game. Jordan James, Noah Whittington, like they helped keep that offense balanced, keep you honest to where you can't sell out for just one aspect of that offense. And it's going to make Jim Knowles in this defense for how talented they are. And they are, I mean, Tripp, I saw this, I couldn't believe it. Oregon in matchup number 1 gained 494 yards. That's the most given up by an Ohio State defense since 2022. That's crazy. And also, it's even crazier. Since that game, it was on October 12th. Ohio State has not allowed a passing touchdown since that game. So we are talking about, you could argue, the best defense in the country. But man, this Oregon offense, they just have so many ways to beat you. It's a really tough matchup for Ohio State, I think, to try to win.
When I saw that stat, I wanted to read it, but I didn't want to steal your thunder, that Ohio State's defense hasn't allowed a passing touchdown since that game. That's why when we talk about trenches, like Oregon has to be able to run the ball in this game with Downs, that second Latham. Like there's so many guys, Ransom in that second, like their corners are really good. Oregon has to have some balance offensively in this game. And that's why the trenches are pivotal. And the trenches are also pivotal for Ohio State in the pass defense, because if they can get pressure on Gabriel and not give him, Oregon does a really good job. And when you watch them, their tackles and guards push the D tackles and D ends out. So Gabriel, who's undersized, he's like generously 5'11", when they give him a lane to throw up the middle where there's no one in front of it. It's like they expand the pocket and they give him this lane. If you can get interior pressure and prevent that lane, then you force him to go side to side, which he can do. But then he's already extending plays. So that's something like, that's also a big part of this. But Oregon, to your point, they have to run the ball to get that balance. They did the first game, and they have over the last half of the season.
I know you got to run here to practice. Busy man here, so we appreciate your time. We'll go rapid fire here really fast. Number 1.
Your schedule is important too. It's not that busy, but I do have. I am going to go.
Yeah, I don't want to get you in trouble here. Number 1, quick pick: Oregon, Ohio State. Ohio State 2.5-point favorites here. Who you got in this game?
I like Oregon. They've been the most consistent, best team in college football all year. I think Ohio State looked really good against Tennessee. I think they're super talented. I think that Michigan game was an anomaly. I still think Oregon, because of who they are, what they've done, and all the different ways they can beat you, I think they've proven it more consistently than Ohio State has this year. I like the Ducks on the West Coast in an instant classic.
I agree. I think Oregon wins. I'll say 31-27. Close game. I think another back and forth. I think Oregon finds a way to pull it out here and win the rematch as well. So, all right, so we both are in agreement. Oregon wins. Penn State wins. Who else is joining them, Tripp, here in the Final Four? Arizona State, Texas. Texas 12.5-point favorites here. Who are you thinking?
I don't want to pick Arizona State for some reason. Like I love Kenny. I think what he's done is unbelievable. I think they have a chip on their shoulder. I think they got a great back. I just don't know that they're ready for the stage yet. And I think even though you can make what you will of Texas's schedule during the regular season, what they've been through in that SEC, having played the Georgia games, the stage, like they're ready for the stage. I think Texas wins it, but I think it's really close.
I think Texas wins. I think they cover. I like their defense's ability to slow down Cam Scatterboot. And I think from there, I think that kind of, just like Jeanty and Boise State, kind of throws Arizona State's offense out of whack. Yeah. I don't love Quinn Ewers. Don't trust him. I'll trust him in this offense enough here to get a win and cover the 12.5-point spread. And then finally, number 2, Georgia, close one here. 1-point favorites over Notre Dame. Gunnar Stockton, backup quarterback, making his first career start for the Dogs. Who we got here, Tripp?
Notre Dame. I think they've been undervalued all year. I do agree, like that's a bad loss to NIU, but they've been as consistently dominant as any team in college football. They can't play from behind. They have to play with the lead. I think this is a low-scoring, run-heavy game, very physical. I think Notre Dame's defense gets a turnover or two that ultimately flips the game. I think Georgia makes the mistake on offense that Riley Leonard doesn't make on offense for Notre Dame. I think their defense helps them win it. I like Notre Dame 20-13.
Wow. we're in agreement.
That would mean Marcus Jeter made 2 field goals. That might be on a limb there. But how about a missed extra point to get us to 20-13?
Ah, nice. No one ever predicts missed extra points. I like it. This is why we keep you on the pod. This is the good stuff.
Honestly, though, seriously, like talking about that game, Jeter could cost them the game.
Good.
In a game that's gonna, like, you figure low scoring touchdown stuff to come by. Watch Notre Dame, like, and when they're at the 20 and they get stopped, will he shank more field goals?
College kickers, man. Just enough said. 2 words.
How many times did a college kicker cost Alabama like an SEC title or national championship shot? They could have won more.
2013.
And often they've overcome their college kicker, Alabama.
Which is ironic, right? The only really
the only weakness on all those great Alabama teams, they always had a kicker that stunk. One last question. I have to run. I can tell, like, are you sick? Like, what do you? I can tell you're battling something.
Can you tell?
Yeah,
I was hoping my voice sounds a little deeper than normal. So
I wish I had that.
Same.
One last thing, like, overall, I think this is great. I think you have 5 or 6 teams left that can win a national championship. I think we're gonna have, after all that's been made of the first round and like bad games, and the discussion now is, do you get a commissioner for college football? Yes, you do. Agree with that. And then how do you seed? I think you seed 1 through 12. You can still give the automatic berths. Maybe even reseed before the next round like the NFL does. No problem with that. I think that's why we had the blowouts as opposed to this 12-team thing not working. Certainly don't need to add more teams to the field.
Great.
But like, you look at this, you're looking at all those narratives that are driven over a 13, 14, 15-week season. Isn't it funny, like, you sit here and Ohio State and Penn State are each 1 win away from a national semifinal. And then, like, all that talk about, well, can Penn State win a big game? Ryan Day, like, what's his job safety going to be like? But if Ohio State beats Tennessee and Oregon to get to the national semifinals, that's a pretty damn good season.
Oh, I agree. If you're Ryan Day, I mean, this is the thing. The only tough part with Penn State and James Franklin is just there's going to be a lot of people that say, well, it's SMU, it's Boise State. Now, I think if you beat Georgia or Notre Dame in the next round, I think that can distinguish a lot.
I think if you get to the Final Four, though, like, pretty good preseason goals to be one of the 4 teams left, no matter how you got there. Like,
I agree with that.
I don't think there's actually any heat on him. Like,
no,
legitimately.
No, I mean, there's no actual.
No, but
like
from
Ryan,
fans,
Ryan is not getting fired.
I think that all goes away if they make the semi. It really goes away if they make the championship, because then they will have a significant win to go with it against like a brand. But I think, like, he's 1 win away from kind of stop like banging the James Franklin can't do this. And I've never been on that bandwagon. I think he's an exceptional coach. I think he's one of the top 5 coaches in college football. Like, it's funny. Last night we were at dinner and we were talking. He really is. I don't know if Penn State fans know this or get this, but he's very routine. He's very consistent. He believes in doing it the right way. He is. I wish people kind of got this more. He's kind of a modern day Joe Paterno. He values the kids. He values their families. He values the academics. He values the community. He knows his role as a leader, and he is a modern day Joe Paterno. Like, I don't know why fans can't get on board. I'm sure there's other reasons, but like, I don't know why fans still like have this discussion. But it is crazy that these narratives for each of these programs could change here in the next 48 hours.
That you're right. That's very interesting. I think I would just wonder in part is because just fans look at wins only and everything else. Like, they'd rather, they don't care in the sense of, oh, how is the family treated? But if you're winning, it doesn't matter. If you're losing, that's when everything else comes up in flames. To Ryan Day, like, I'm fascinated to see, like, if he does win here and he smokes Tennessee, beats Oregon in a rematch, what is he?
Like, I know
he's gonna get
like, it's national championship for them. Like, this is where it's interesting because, right, like, there's a big picture thing. Like, oh, it's national championship or bust, but you don't know like what the path to it is. Like, if all of a sudden you have 2 postseason wins against the best team in the country all year and Tennessee, one of the top 3 teams of the SEC, like, I don't know how you fault the guy. Like, oh crap, we made it to the semis, but lost a heartbreaker against a great tech. Like, even like how the games play out matters for these coaches and these narrative. And it's like a narrative. Does the narrative matter during the regular season? No, because you have chances to change it. Here's where the narrative matters a little bit more, because it's going to live with you for the entire off season if you come up short at this time of year.
And that's if you're Ryan Day, think about it. You went through really 2 weeks of hell right after losing to Michigan. If you beat Oregon, I mean, look, it's still a long way to go, right? You got to get 3 wins here, and it's a tough road. Oregon, probably Texas, and Penn State, Georgia, Notre Dame. Like, it's a very tough road. If you get through those 3 games, Tripp, those 2 weeks are going to look like 2 of the most idiotic weeks in Ohio State fandom history between Michigan and that first game. You're right. It is a total 180 shift in the span of a month, possibly here for. It's going to be one of the most like intriguing discussions and like look backs in history like ever. Crazy. Man. But that's what Tripp, like you said before, that's why we play the games, baby. That's why we don't have these hypotheticals applied on paper. We play the damn games. And I'm so excited for these quarterfinal games to be played. So you got to get to practice. We'll end the pod here. We broke down the games. Thank you so much for joining us here on Still Enrolled. Again, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. You can see Tripp in his nice little Phoenix outfit here. I will say, sweatshirt, vest, love the look. It is a very fresh look here. Enjoy practice. Have a great Happy New Year. We'll talk to you after the games right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.